In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns and white picket fences defined the landscape, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. It was the kind of place people dreamed of when they imagined stability and peace, a sanctuary away from the chaos of the outside world. For Jake and his girlfriend, Alina, it seemed like the perfect spot to start fresh. They had moved into their cozy home 6 months ago, eager to leave behind the turbulence of their past lives. Jake worked as an IT consultant, spending most of his days troubleshooting computer issues for clients across the country. He was friendly but reserved, preferring low-key weekends filled with video games or tinkering in the garage. Alina, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of energy and charm. She taught yoga classes at the local community center and spent hours tending to her garden, coaxing vibrant flowers and vegetables to life. To anyone who met her, she appeared to be the epitome of serenity, a woman content with her simple, wholesome lifestyle. But appearances can be deceiving. What none of their neighbors knew, and what Jake only partially understood, was that Alina's calm exterior masked a lifetime of extraordinary experiences. Before settling into this sleepy suburb, she had lived a very different existence. Years earlier, Alina had been part of an undercover operation that dismantled one of South America's most dangerous drug cartels. Using her sharp mind, physical prowess, and uncanny ability to read people, she infiltrated their ranks and brought them down from within. It was a mission that required courage, sacrifice, and more than a little danger. When it was over, Alina walked away from that life, determined to build something quieter, safer, and far removed from violence. The Homeowners Association, HOA, in their neighborhood prided itself on maintaining order. Rules governed nearly every aspect of life here. How often you mowed your lawn, how loud your music could be, even where you parked your car overnight. Most residents accepted these regulations without complaint, valuing the sense of structure they provided. However, enforcement fell largely to Carl, the self-appointed head of the HOA's security team. Carl wasn't a trained officer. He was just a middle-aged man with a clipboard, a flashlight, and a holstered handgun strapped to his belt. He took his role incredibly seriously, patrolling the streets each night like a vigilant determined to root out wrongdoing, real or imagined. From the moment Alina first encountered Carl, she sensed there was something unsettling about him. His demeanor was aggressive, almost confrontational, as if he relished finding fault with others. While many neighbors dismissed him as a harmless nuisance, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that he was trouble waiting to happen. Her instincts, honed by years of navigating high-stakes situations, rarely steered her wrong. But she told herself not to worry. After all, this was supposed to be a safe place, a refuge from the kind of conflict she used to face daily. Little did she, or anyone else, know Carl's reckless behavior would soon push Alina back into the spotlight. And when that happened, the quiet suburban life she'd worked so hard to create would be tested in ways no one could have anticipated. One warm summer evening, Jake and Alina decided to host a small barbecue in their backyard. They invited a handful of friends from the neighborhood, setting up string lights and a portable speaker to create a cozy atmosphere. The group laughed and chatted, enjoying burgers fresh off the grill and cold drinks as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was the kind of gathering that made suburban life feel special, a chance to connect with others and enjoy each other's company. Alina and Jake had been careful to keep things low-key. They turned the music down after an hour, mindful of noise complaints, and ensured no trash or stray napkins blew into neighboring yards. Everything seemed to be going perfectly until Carl appeared at the edge of their driveway, clipboard in hand, and a scowl etched across his face. He stood there for a moment, watching the group with narrowed eyes before striding toward them with unmistakable purpose. "Evening," Carl barked, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "You folks know there's a rule about outdoor gatherings ending by 9 o'clock. It's almost 1/4 past." Alina stepped forward, her expression calm but firm. "Hi, Carl. We're wrapping things up soon," she said politely. "Everyone will be gone within the next 10 minutes. Carl didn't seem satisfied. His jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages on his clipboard, though it was clear he already knew what he wanted to say. "Rules are rules," he snapped. "I've warned you too before about following HOA guidelines. If you don't shut this down right now, I'll have to report you." The mood shifted instantly. The laughter faded, replaced by awkward silence as guests exchanged uneasy glances. Jake stepped closer to Alina, ready to smooth things over if needed. "Come on, Carl," he said, forcing a smile. "We're literally finishing up. Can't we just call it a night without any drama?" But Carl wasn't interested in compromise. His tone grew sharper, more confrontational. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he shot back. "This neighborhood has standards for a reason. People like you need to follow them if you want to live here." Alina felt her patience wearing thin. She'd dealt with difficult people before, but there was something particularly grating about Carl's entitled attitude. Still, she kept her voice steady. "We're not breaking any laws, Carl. And honestly, coming out here with threats isn't helping anyone. Why don't you let us finish cleaning up and head inside?" That's when things took a turn. Carl's face reddened, and he reached for the holster strapped to his hip. In one swift motion, he pulled out his gun and pointed it directly at Alina. Gasps rippled through the crowd as everyone froze, unsure of what to do next. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the weapon, his mind racing. Was Carl really willing to escalate this petty dispute to such extremes? For Alina, however, the moment felt eerily familiar. Instead of panic, a strange calm settled over her. Her muscles tensed slightly, ready to react if necessary, but her focus remained sharp. She locked eyes with Carl, her gaze unwavering. "Put the gun down," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. There was no anger in her words, only quiet authority, the kind that comes from years of facing far greater dangers than an overzealous HOA enforcer. Jake watched in stunned silence, torn between fear and awe. He'd seen glimpses of Alina's strength before, but nothing quite like this. Most people would have crumbled under the weight of Carl's aggression. Yet here she stood, unshaken, as if she'd been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. Carl hesitated, suddenly aware that he might have crossed a line. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered the gun and returned it to its holster. Without another word, he turned on his heel and marched back to his truck, leaving behind a trail of unease. As his taillights disappeared down the street, the guests began to murmur among themselves, shaken by what had just unfolded. Jake finally found his voice. "Are you okay?" he asked, turning to Alina. She nodded, though her expression was unreadable. For the first time since they'd met, Jake realized there was still so much he didn't know about the woman he loved, and maybe, just maybe, she was even more extraordinary than he'd ever imagined. The barbecue ended abruptly after Carl's dramatic exit, leaving the guests unsettled and eager to leave. Jake and Alina cleaned up in silence, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavily between them. Once everyone was gone, and the backyard was tidied, Jake finally turned to Alina, his face a mix of concern and confusion. "Why weren't you scared?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "That guy pulled a gun on you, Alina. He could have, I don't know, done something crazy." Alina sighed, setting down the stack of folding chairs she'd been carrying. She looked at Jake for a long moment before speaking, her tone measured but tinged with resignation. "Because I've faced worse," she said simply. "Much worse." Jake stared at her, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean? Worse than some random guy waving a gun around?" Alina hesitated, then gestured toward the patio table. "Let's sit," she said. As they settled into the chairs, she folded her hands in her lap, gathering her thoughts. For years, she kept her past hidden, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she wanted to move forward, to leave behind the chaos and danger that once defined her life. But now, sitting across from Jake under the soft glow of the porch light, she realized she couldn't keep avoiding the truth. I wasn't always a yoga instructor, she began, her voice quiet but steady. Before we met, I worked undercover for a government task force. My job was to infiltrate criminal organizations, drug cartels, human trafficking rings, things like that. It was dangerous work, Jake. Every day felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong move, one slip-up, and it could have cost me my life. Jake's eyes widened as he listened, trying to reconcile the woman sitting in front of him with the image of someone capable of taking down hardened criminals. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were, like a spy or something." "Something like that," Elena replied with a faint smile. "About 2 years ago, I helped dismantle one of South America's biggest drug cartels. It took months of planning, patience, and putting myself in situations I never thought I'd survive. When it was over, I walked away from all of it. I wanted a normal life, a safe life. That's why I came here, to this neighborhood. I thought it would be peaceful." Jake shook his head, still processing everything. "But tonight, when Carl pulled that gun on you, you didn't even flinch. Most people would have panicked, but you acted like you'd seen it 100 times before." "That's because I have," Elena admitted. "I've been in situations where guns were drawn, threats were made, and lives were on the line. And every time, I learned how to stay calm, assess the situation, and act decisively. Fear doesn't help when you're dealing with someone who's unstable. What matters is control of yourself, of the moment." Jake leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea," he murmured. "All this time, I thought I knew you, but you didn't." Elena finished for him, her tone gentle. "And that's okay. I wanted it that way. The person I am now, the one who teaches yoga, grows tomatoes, and tries to blend in, it's who I want to be. But tonight reminded me that sometimes the past catches up with you, whether you like it or not." As the night grew quieter around them, Jake found himself grappling with a mix of emotions. Admiration for Elena's strength, guilt for not knowing her full story, and fear of what might happen next. He reached across the table and took her hand in his. "Whatever happens," he said firmly, "we'll figure it out together." Elena squeezed his hand, grateful for his support, but aware that Carl's actions wouldn't go unanswered. She knew the neighborhood gossip mill would start turning soon, fueled by whispers of the confrontation. And while she hoped to avoid further drama, she also understood that Carl wasn't the type to back down easily. If anything, tonight's incident might only embolden him to dig deeper and uncover secrets she'd rather keep buried. For now, though, she pushed those worries aside. Sitting there with Jake, surrounded by the comforting familiarity of their home, she allowed herself a brief moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight, she chose to focus on the man beside her, the one person who truly mattered. By the next morning, news of Carl's confrontation with Elena had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors who hadn't been at the barbecue pieced together snippets of the story from those who had, and soon everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some were sympathetic toward Elena, calling Carl's behavior reckless and unnecessary. Others sided with him, claiming she must have done something to provoke him. After all, why else would he pull a gun? Carl himself wasted no time spinning his version of events. He began making rounds, knocking on doors, and warning residents about that woman who lived on Maple Street. "She's trouble," he told anyone who would listen. "Thinks she's above the rules, talking back like she owns the place. I was just doing my job, trying to keep order, and she went after me." His words painted Elena as the aggressor, someone who didn't respect authority or care about the community. But not everyone bought into his narrative. A few neighbors, including Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow known for her sharp wit and even sharper observations, raised eyebrows at Carl's account. If she really attacked him, why didn't he call the police right away? Mrs. Thompson asked during a casual chat over coffee. "Sounds fishy to me." Elena, meanwhile, decided it was time to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't let Carl's lies go unchecked. They risked turning the entire neighborhood against her. When she received notice of an upcoming HOA meeting, she made up her mind to attend. It wasn't her first choice. She preferred staying out of the spotlight, but avoiding the issue wouldn't make it disappear. The night of the meeting arrived, and the small community center buzzed with tension. Dozens of residents gathered in folding chairs arranged in neat rows, while Carl stood near the front, looking smug and self-assured. As the discussion turned to recent incidents, Carl seized the opportunity to air his grievances. He launched into a tirade about Alina, accusing her of being uncooperative, disrespectful, and potentially dangerous. When it was Alina's turn to speak, she rose calmly from her seat and walked to the front of the room. Every eye followed her, curiosity mixed with skepticism. She took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. "First, let me say that I value living in this neighborhood," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I've worked hard to be a good neighbor, to contribute positively, and follow the rules. But what happened the other night wasn't about rules. It was about intimidation and misuse of power." She went on to describe the events of the barbecue, sticking to the facts without embellishment. She explained how Carl escalated a minor disagreement into a hostile confrontation, culminating in him drawing a firearm. "This isn't about whether I broke a noise ordinance," she continued. "It's about accountability. Carl is not a trained law enforcement officer. He has no business carrying a weapon or threatening people. What he did was reckless and dangerous, not just to me, but to everyone here." Her words resonated with many in the room. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd as some nodded in understanding. Even Mrs. Thompson chimed in, saying, "She's got a point. We hired Carl to patrol the streets, not act like some cowboy with a badge." Carl, however, wasn't ready to concede defeat. His face flushed red as he interrupted, stammering accusations and trying to discredit Alina's account. But his arguments lacked substance, and his tone grew increasingly defensive. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that public opinion had shifted, at least among those present. Carl stormed out, muttering under his breath, but Alina knew this wasn't over. On the drive home, Jake glanced at her. "Think that'll stop him?" he asked. Alina shook her head. "Not a chance. If anything, it'll make him angrier. But at least now people know the truth, or part of it, anyway." As they pulled into their driveway, Alina felt a flicker of satisfaction. Standing up for herself had been the right thing to do. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Carl's obsession with her wasn't going away anytime soon. And if he kept digging, he might uncover secrets she'd rather leave buried forever. Carl didn't take the HOA meeting's outcome lightly. If anything, Alina's calm and composed rebuttal only fueled his anger. He couldn't stand being challenged, especially in front of the very people he believed should respect his authority. In his mind, Alina had humiliated him, and he was determined to regain control, no matter what it took. Over the next few days, Carl became obsessed with proving that Alina wasn't the innocent neighbor she claimed to be. He spent hours poring over public records, social media profiles, and news archives, searching for anything that could paint her in a negative light. At first, he found nothing unusual, just photos of her gardening, teaching yoga, and smiling at community events. But then, buried deep in an old online article from several years ago, he stumbled upon something intriguing. The headline read, "Asterisk undercover operative helps dismantle major drug cartel." Asterisk. The details were vague, protecting the operative's identity, but there were enough clues to suggest a connection. A pseudonym, Alina R., was mentioned alongside descriptions of her role in the operation, a skilled infiltrator who brought down one of South America's most dangerous criminal organizations. To Carl, this was more than enough ammunition. Convinced he'd uncovered proof of Alina's secret past, Carl decided to confront her again. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, he marched up to Jake and Alina's front door, his chest puffed out and his hand resting ominously on the holster at his side. When Alina answered the knock, she wasn't surprised to see him standing there. What did surprise her was the smug grin plastered across his face. "I know who you are," Carl said, his voice dripping with accusation. "You think you can hide behind your little yoga classes and flower beds, but I've done my homework. You're not just some quiet suburbanite. You're a fraud." Alina crossed her arms, unimpressed by his theatrics. "Is that so?" She replied coolly. "And what exactly do you think you know?" "You worked undercover," Carl spat, leaning closer. "You took down a cartel. That's not exactly normal behavior, is it? How do we know you're not hiding something else? Maybe you were still involved in whatever it is you used to do." Jake appeared behind Alina, his expression tense. "Are you serious right now?" he asked, incredulous. "You broke into our home once before with a gun. Are you really trying to accuse us of something based on hearsay?" Carl ignored him, focusing instead on Alina. "If you've got nothing to hide, then why didn't you tell anyone about your past? Why sneak around like you're ashamed?" Alina's patience began to wear thin. She stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "First of all," she said, her tone sharp but controlled, "my past is none of your business. Second, if you think knowing about it gives you the right to harass me, or worse, threaten me again, you're dead wrong." For a moment, Carl faltered, taken aback by her composure, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Instead, he reached for his gun, pulling it out and pointing it directly at her. "Maybe I'll just make sure you're telling the truth," he sneered. That was when everything changed. In one fluid motion, Alina moved faster than Carl could react. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it until the gun clattered to the ground, then spun him around, pinning him against the porch railing. Her grip was firm but precise, leaving no room for escape. Neighbors who had been watching from their windows or walking their dogs stopped in shock, unsure of what they were witnessing. "Call the police," Alina called out to Jake, her voice calm but commanding. As Jake dialed 911, Carl struggled futilely, his bravado crumbling under the weight of reality. For the first time, he realized he was outmatched, and not just physically. When the officers arrived, Carl tried to spin the story, claiming Alina had attacked him without provocation. But witnesses came forward, corroborating her version of events. One neighbor even recorded part of the altercation on their phone, capturing Carl drawing his weapon and Alina disarming him in self-defense. By the end of the night, Carl was handcuffed and placed in the back of a squad car, charged with aggravated assault and unlawful possession of a firearm. As the commotion died down, Jake turned to Alina, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You handled that like a pro," he said, shaking his head. "Seriously, where did you learn to do that?" Alina gave a small shrug, brushing off the compliment. "Let's just say I've had practice," she replied. Then, glancing at the crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch, she added, "Looks like the neighborhood finally knows the real Carl." Though the incident left Alina feeling exposed, it also marked a turning point. Carl's act. The fallout from Carl's arrest rippled through the neighborhood like a shockwave, leaving residents divided but ultimately more aware of the truth. For days, conversations buzzed about what had happened on Alina and Jake's porch. Some neighbors were horrified by Carl's actions, while others remained skeptical, clinging to their initial impressions of him as a well-meaning, if overzealous, security guard. But as details emerged, the video footage, witness testimonies, and even Carl's own escalating behavior, it became harder to deny that he had gone too far. Local news outlets picked up the story, eager to report on the bizarre events unfolding in what was supposed to be a quiet suburban community. Reporters descended on the neighborhood, knocking on doors and setting up cameras near the park where children usually played. The headlines ranged from sensational, HOA enforcer arrested after confrontation with former undercover operative, to more measured, suburban dispute highlights need for accountability. Alina avoided interviews at first, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. However, Jake encouraged her to share her side. not to glorify her past, but to hold Carl accountable and remind people of the importance of responsible behavior. Reluctantly, Alina agreed to give a brief statement. Standing alongside Jake on their front lawn, she addressed the cameras with quiet confidence. "What happened here wasn't just about me or Carl," she said. "It's about accountability. No one should feel unsafe in their own home because someone with a badge or a gun decides they're above the law. This isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring that everyone feels protected, not threatened." Her words struck a chord, earning praise from many who watched the interview. Even critics softened their stance, acknowledging that Carl's actions had crossed a line. As the coverage continued, Alina found herself becoming an unexpected symbol of resilience, a woman who refused to back down when faced with intimidation. Meanwhile, Carl's reputation crumbled under scrutiny. His mugshot appeared on local news segments, his face sullen and defeated. Charges piled up against him: aggravated assault, brandishing a firearm unlawfully, and multiple counts of harassment. The HOA board issued a formal apology to Alina and terminated its relationship with Carl immediately. They also announced plans to revamp their security measures, hiring licensed professionals instead of relying on volunteers like Carl. For Alina, the attention brought both relief and discomfort. On one hand, she was glad the truth had come out. Neighbors who had once eyed her suspiciously now approached her with gratitude, thanking her for standing up to Carl. Mrs. Thompson even brought over a plate of homemade cookies, declaring, "You've done this neighborhood a favor, dear. Mark my words, things will be better now." But on the other hand, Alina couldn't help feeling exposed. Her past, which she had worked so hard to leave behind, was now part of public knowledge. Strangers recognized her at the grocery store, whispering about the Cartel takedown, or asking intrusive questions about her time undercover. While most meant no harm, the constant reminders made it difficult to move forward. Jake noticed the toll it was taking on her. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, he turned to her and said, "You don't have to keep proving yourself to anyone, you know. You've already shown them who you are, and that's enough." Alina smiled faintly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I just want things to go back to normal," she admitted. "But I guess normal doesn't exist anymore, does it?" "Maybe not," Jake replied gently. "But we can make something new, something better." As the weeks passed, the neighborhood began to heal. Residents formed a new neighborhood watch program, prioritizing collaboration and mutual support over fear-based policing. Alina and Jake played key roles in shaping these efforts, earning trust and admiration from their peers. Though Alina still preferred a low-profile life, she embraced her role as a leader, inspiring others to stand up against injustice without resorting to aggression. And while the shadow of Carl's actions lingered, it served as a reminder of how far they'd come, as individuals and as a community. For the first time in months, Alina felt hopeful about the future. She didn't need a white picket fence or a perfect lawn to find peace. All she needed was the love of the man beside her and the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the weeks that followed Carl's arrest, the neighborhood began to transform. The fear and tension he had sown were slowly replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. Residents who had once kept to themselves now greeted each other warmly, exchanging smiles and small talk during morning walks or evening strolls. Alina and Jake became central figures in this shift, not because they sought attention, but because their actions had inspired others to rethink what it meant to be part of a community. The new Neighborhood Watch program was a far cry from Carl's heavy-handed approach. Instead of patrolling with weapons or enforcing arbitrary rules, volunteers focused on building connections. They organized monthly potlucks, where neighbors could share food and stories, and created a shared online calendar for tasks like lawn maintenance and driveway shoveling during winter. For the first time, the HOA meetings felt less like lectures and more like conversations, with everyone contributing ideas to improve life in the neighborhood. Alina, despite her initial reluctance, found herself at the heart of these efforts. Her calm demeanor and natural leadership made her a trusted voice among residents. When disagreements arose, like whether to repaint the playground equipment or how to handle late-night noise complaints, people turned to her for guidance. She didn't have all the answers, but she listened carefully and encouraged compromise, reminding everyone that they were stronger together than apart. Jake marveled at how seamlessly Elena adapted to her role. "You're kind of amazing, you know that," he teased one afternoon as they planted flowers in her garden. "Who would have thought you'd go from undercover operative to neighborhood peacemaker?" Elena laughed, brushing dirt off her hands. "I'm just trying to keep things simple," she said. "No drama, no secrets, just good people looking out for each other." But simplicity didn't mean forgetting the past. In fact, Elena came to see her history not as something to hide, but as a source of strength. It reminded her of how far she'd come, and how much she valued the peace she'd built with Jake. Together, they continued nurturing their home and their relationship, finding joy in the little things. Lazy Sundays spent reading by the window, quiet dinners under the stars, and long talks about their dreams for the future. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Elena stood on her porch watching the sunrise. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and distant wood smoke, and the world felt still and perfect. Jake joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked with a grin. "Just thinking about how lucky we are," she replied softly. "This place, it's not perfect, but it's ours, and I think we've earned it." Jake nodded, squeezing her gently. "We definitely have." As the day unfolded, neighbors gathered in the park for the annual fall festival, a tradition revived after years of neglect. There were pumpkin carving contests, hayrides, and tables laden with homemade pies and cider. Children darted between booths, laughing as they played games, while adults chatted amiably, sharing updates about work, school, and life. Elena wandered through the crowd, stopping occasionally to chat with friends or admire someone's handiwork. At one point, Mrs. Thompson approached her, holding a plate piled high with cookies. "Thought you might need a sugar boost," she said with a wink. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "You've done wonders for this place, dear. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Elena smiled, touched by the sentiment. "It wasn't just me," she said. "Everyone pitched in. That's what makes this neighborhood special." Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly before moving on, leaving Elena to reflect on her words. She realized that healing wasn't about erasing the scars of the past. It was about learning to live with them, using those experiences to grow stronger and wiser. Carl's actions had been a test, forcing her to confront parts of herself she tried to bury. But instead of breaking her, the ordeal had revealed her resilience and strengthened her bond with Jake and their community. By evening, the festival wound down, and families headed home, arms full of prizes and leftovers. As Elena and Jake cleaned up their booth, they paused to watch the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The world seemed quieter now, softer somehow, as if it too had found its balance. For Elena, this moment marked a new beginning. She no longer feared the shadows of her past. Instead, she embraced them as proof of her journey. And though challenges would inevitably arise, life rarely stayed peaceful for long. She faced them with confidence, knowing she had everything she needed: love, courage, and a community that truly cared.